Well, hello and welcome to Restoration Church Online. We're so glad that you are here with us this morning. My name's Katie. I am one of the pastors here at Restoration Church, and we want to let you know a little bit about us. Here at Restoration Church, our mission is to empower all people to love and follow Jesus. We believe that every single one of us has a part to play in the story of God as He is restoring and renewing all things. So I want to direct you to restorationchurchsd.com/live. Right there on that site, you can find out all that you would ever want to know about Restoration Church. And if you're new around here, I'd encourage you to fill out that top button, click connection card. That way you can let us know you're here. You can share a little bit about yourself, and we would love for someone from our team to reach out to you, answer any questions that you might have, and help you get connected to the story of Restoration Church. You can also scroll down to find great resources for your kids if you want to have church at home as a family. You can download and watch those videos. They're awesome. For all of you kids that started school this week, high fives. We love you, we miss you, and we are praying for you. To share a few more things coming up in the next week or so, we have our Restoration Church Vision Sunday coming up next Sunday, September 13th. It's going to be right here in our parking lot. We also are going to have the same experience online as well as in-house church. So there's 3 different ways to be part of Vision Sunday, and we hope that you will prioritize, save the date, mark your calendars, make or change plans to be there. It's going to be incredible. You can go to restorationchurchsd.com/Vision Sunday to RSVP and let us know which of those 3 ways that you are planning on being a part of Vision Sunday this year. And then finally, I want to personally invite each and every one of you to be a part of something that we're excited about that we've been offering these last few months. It's called Restoration Retreats. We know that this time of quarantine has been rough for so many of us. We've faced unprecedented change. We've pivoted, we've turned, we've shifted so much of our lives. Maybe even just this week with school starting for many of you. We are weary. And one of the things that I love about Jesus and about this invitation that we get from him is that Jesus often withdrew from the crowds. After times of much work, he would slip away to a quiet place. And that is exactly what these retreats are designed to be. A time to rest, a time to hear from God, a time of prayer and deep listening, a time to just be refreshed and to receive some vision from God for what he's done in these last few months and what he might have for you in the future. So it's a half-day retreat coming up on Saturday, September 19th. You can go to restorationchurchsd.com/events to find out a little bit more about these restoration retreats and to sign up. We hope we'll see you there. Lastly, we're excited to share with you that today we are starting a brand new series called Ready for Restoration. We are so excited that throughout the month of September, we are going to be leaning in to hear what is it that God has for us for the future of our church. We believe that God is writing an incredible story, and we want you to be a part of it. So you've picked the right time to jump in, clicking on, and joining us today. In just a minute, we're going to hear from Pastor Kurt as we kick off this brand new series. Right now, as you get ready, why don't you turn to the person next to you, give them a high five and say, I am ready for restoration.
Well, hello and welcome to Restoration Church Online. We are so glad that you chose to join us today. Wherever you're tuning in from, we are thrilled that you are a part of our online community as we begin this incredibly important new conversation for the next 4 weeks called Ready for Restoration. My name's Kurt. I'm one of the pastors here, and I'm just thrilled that you have invited us to be a part of your spiritual journey. So thank you so much for tuning in today. And I don't have to tell you, you know this, you've experienced this in many different ways, but our world has been rocked over these last few months into a space that none of us would have asked for. None of us really know how to navigate through, if we're really honest. And as we look around, we have had to find new ways of doing almost everything, including church. There's new ways of how we engage with our favorite restaurants or our favorite places to shop. There's new ways that we do relationships now that we can't just go grab a drink and hang out. It's like, yeah, I'll log on at 8 o'clock. There's new ways that we're doing education even this week for many of you with your kids starting virtual school yet again for another school year. And we find ourselves in this place where there is so much undoing happening in our life, in our souls, and in our collective consciousness. And if you're like me, when we're in those spaces where things are being undone, the temptation and desire to reach back for something more comfortable, more, understandable, more familiar can be absolutely at its height. But what if, and this is the question I want us to wrestle with for these next 4 weeks together, what if this collective undoing that we are experiencing is not just something to fight against and try to resist and try to cling to some new normal, but what if this collective undoing is actually an invitation from God to actually create a new future together? What if in this year that, at the beginning of it, 2020, this is the year of vision. We all had, dream boards and goals and things we were excited to see come to pass. That if we're honest, this year and what it's actually turned out to look like is very different from what we would have expected. But yet, what if that idea that 2020 is a year of vision still is true? It's not the vision that we had wanted to see or that we would have thought up on our own, but what if 2020 has been the year that God has brought to our attention, brought to our eyesight, brought to our spiritual vision, the things that he actually wanted to show us all along, things that are dear to his heart, things that are important for us to really engage and wrestle with, things that needed to go away and be stripped away from our experiences so that we could have a truer and more honest and authentic engagement with God and with each other. As we look around, as we have conversations, as I've chatted with my neighbors and people that aren't Christians, that aren't church people, and maybe you've sensed this as well, we realize that there is a rising tide of people that are absolutely no longer interested in any sort of institutional religion that clings to its own way, demands its own rights, and is simply about protecting its own territory. They're done with that. It is irrelevant and no longer helpful in the conversation of their life. And yet, at the exact same time, there are more and more people that we find are interested in a conversation about a restorative community that desires to be for the society around it, for the people that they engage with, that they would bring life and hope and healing to what it is that people are feeling right here and now in 2020. And the best news of all is that Jesus himself had no interest in the former, but spoke so often about how to create the latter, how to create that kind of restorative community that actually, if we're honest, all of our souls perhaps are more ready for in 2020 than we have been perhaps in our entire lifetime. And so as we engage in this conversation over these next few weeks, I want to invite you to lean in, to engage, to ask these deep questions that God might be wanting to bring to your attention so that ultimately you can begin to love and follow him more closely, more deeply, and that our neighbors and our community around us is better for it. So if you're like me, as you hear that, my guess is that there's something in your soul that begins to rise up and say, that sounds awesome. That sounds like what we were created for. I'm excited for that. But could we wait till I'm just a little less tired? Like I'm tired. And my guess is you're tired. And all of this pivoting and all of this change and all of this quarantine over the last 6 months, we are tired. We have had to pivot so much. We've had to adapt so much. And you're tired of pivoting. You're tired of adapting. You're tired of working from home and being childcare and being teacher and having to be your own tech support. You're tired of Zoom. Me too. It was fun to order Postmates at the beginning, and you're tired of takeout. Like, we are tired of so many things in our life, and the amount of frenetic energy that has been required over these last 6 months of stay at home, as ironic as that sounds, it has worn down our soul. And for many of us, we're like, again, I'm in on that, but can we just wait until I have a little bit more time, a little bit more energy to work myself up? And the reality is, though, is that as we look through the scriptures, as we see in history the ways that God has moved throughout his people, it's actually in those moments when we are worn down, when we can no longer depend on ourselves, when we can't muster up the hustle anymore as much as we feel like we're young, scrappy, and hungry and we can make it happen, like we can't do it. That in those moments when we feel weak, when we feel defeated, it's actually in exactly that same space that God might be about to do something miraculous. And so that's what we're going to look at over these next few weeks as we don't settle for creating just a new normal, but we actually lean into creating a new future together. And this was not much different than the questions and the ideas that the first followers of Jesus had when they were walking around the planet with him in modern-day Israel and Palestine thousands of years ago. In fact, there was this conversation that is recorded for us in the Gospels where the Gospel writer looks around and understands that this is a big moment, this is a big conversation. This is worth remembering because his followers ask a very important question. And John, who was Jesus' best friend, who was there in the crowd when this conversation happened, later in his life wrote this down because it was probably such an impactful moment for him where he saw the perspective of Jesus around these kinds of questions. And it starts in John 14. It says this. The verses will be up on the screen, or you can follow along in your own Bible, or you can open another tab real quick and jump over to YouVersion. But in John 14, John records that Thomas, one of the other disciples, said to him, meaning Jesus, "Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way?" They'd heard Jesus talk about the way. This is the way of the kingdom of God. This is where I'm leading you. And Thomas finally has enough courage to say, hey, we don't know what that is. Can you be more specific? And Jesus answered to him, I am the way, I am the truth, and I'm the life. And in fact, no one comes to the Father except through me. And if you really know me, you will know my Father. This is an incredible promise from Jesus that when we get closer to Jesus, we actually get to know God. And he says, so if you know me, you will know my Father as well. And so from now on, you do know him because you've seen me. And then Philip chimes in and he says, hey, since we're talking about it, Jesus, show us the Father and then that will be enough for us. And Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip? Haven't you been around me long enough? Haven't you understood what it is we've been talking about? Jesus says, don't you know that even after I have been among you for such a long time, you still don't understand? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. He reiterates this idea. How can you say then, show us the Father, when I'm standing right here, Jesus would say, right? Don't you believe that I am of the Father and that the Father is in me? He's saying, don't you believe these things I've been telling you? And then this is where he pivots and he no longer focuses on the immediate moment, but he casts a vision for them. And I believe that vision is actually for us as well. And he says, hey, if you don't believe just the words I've told you, look around at the things that I've done. Because the words that I've said to you, I don't speak on my own authority, but rather it is the Father living in me who is doing the work. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. And that at least, if you don't believe that, you can believe the evidence of the works that I'm doing themselves. Very truly I say to you, Jesus says, whoever believes in me will not only do the works that I've been doing, but they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. So we actually have this same conversation in our communities and in our souls that the first followers of Jesus were having with him in John 14, 5 through 12, where we are wondering, where are we going? If there's a God and if God is good and God cares about us, and maybe you've asked that question over these last few months, why is this happening and how do we get through it? Is really the best response just to hunker down and try to not move and just let this thing pass over and try to survive? Or is there a deeper invitation to a better story for you and for me, even in the midst of all that's changed in our world? Even in the midst of trying to wrestle through the questions that you might be asking, whether you're a church person or not, this has leveled the playing field for us. And so I have some good news and I have some bad news for us all as we kind of navigate through the beginning of this conversation. And the good news is that there actually is a way forward. And we're going to talk about it. But the bad news is that you are not the guide. The good news is there is a way forward. But the bad news is I'm not the guide. You're not the guide. We actually are not the ones that are going to lead us out of this because none of us have been here before. None of us have navigated this scenario. None of us have been in this cultural moment before, and none of us actually really know how to navigate through it. We can do the best we can. We're all trying to do the best we can to put one foot in front of the other, but we're not really sure how this is going to turn out. In the heart of our hearts, in the spaces that you may not even say to your kids, we don't know. And that phrase, I don't know, can be the most terrifying phrase for most of us. We can overcome almost any obstacle if we know what it is, but navigating uncertainty, navigating the unknown is so threatening. Yet Jesus seemed very comfortable leading his followers into the unknown. Insert Elsa, right? But this is the moment that we find ourselves in. And so what do you do when you know there's a way forward, but you're not the guide? In fact, in the book of Proverbs, starting in verse 5 of chapter 3, it has this incredible encouragement of wisdom for us. And it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Like I said before, these moments when we don't know where to go, we don't know how to move forward, those are the spaces that God often has incredible things in store for us because we no longer depend on ourselves. But if you're like me, you hear a verse like that, you're like, great, don't depend on my own understanding. Got it, I don't know what to do, so I have nothing to depend on. So we know what not to do, but what should we do? Where should we place our trust? What should we lean into? I don't know about you, but in this space right now, like I'm sitting here talking to a camera with a bunch of lights on and a microphone. Our whole team has had to pivot from what we knew how to do and most of us had done for years, if not decades. And now we're video producers and online content creators and our own tech support and chat room hosts. Like this is not what we were expecting. You do not know how to navigate perhaps all the things that you've had to walk through in your business or with your education or in your home over these last few months. And so when we feel this invitation from the Spirit to no longer depend on our own understanding, well, often our understanding has already run out. And yet the author of Proverbs is more concerned not with the level of your understanding. Because remember, this was written by Solomon, the wisest person who's ever lived. So this wasn't about the net value of how much understanding you have. This was a posture and a position of our heart and a perspective of, hey, even though I know so much, I'm not going to depend on that. Even though you're successful and highly educated, that actually isn't what you should lean on. Even though your net worth is strong or your job is still intact, this has shown us that the economy is not something to lean on or depend on. Even though your whole situation with your relationships with your kids and your marriage has navigated this so far, it has definitely, if you're like me, raised to the surface new questions and new conversations of how do we handle conflict? How do we speak to each other? How can we navigate moving forward being in such close proximity? So again, Solomon, the wisest person who ever lived, is not speaking to the amount of knowledge you have. He's saying no matter how much you have, you don't depend on it. There's something even better to lean on, to trust in. And he leans back to this conversation that his father had, that King David, Solomon's dad, wrote in Psalm 23, this idea that has become so familiar to us. You might have a piece of artwork hanging in your house with it on it, or at least has been on a mug that you've seen somewhere at Hobby Lobby or something. But to really engage with Psalm 23, it's not always the feel-good passage we think that it is. Let's look at it together. It starts off saying, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing." We could stop there and have an entire series on the perspective that so many of us live in, where we focus on what we don't have rather than what God has already given to us. And David writes in Psalm 23, you actually lack nothing. Not because of your net worth, not because of your social connections, not because you've figured out how to navigate all this, but because the Lord is your shepherd, because God is your guide. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures and leads me beside quiet waters. Do you and I, do we actually trust where God is taking us? We read that passage and all we can picture is a serene moment, but it actually says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He has this conversation that he's reminding us that just like a good shepherd does to his sheep, that he knows when it is time to rest and to fill them with food. And this is a place to actually get what you can because there might be some difficult steps ahead. This is how God leads us. He said, this is a time to rest. This is a time to fill. And this is a time to walk and to work. He refreshes my soul, he says. That actually, in the midst of such an unrefreshed moment of culture, in the most unrefreshing of times that are challenging and draining, he says, God refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his namesake. That actually the way God is guiding us is not always just for our benefit, but it could often be for his glory. And even though I walk through the darkest valley, and that might be how some of you are feeling right now in this time, it says, I will fear no evil because you are with me. Again, David writes in such a way that draws our attention that the fact is we don't have to fear our circumstances because we know we are walking with the presence of God. It says, you are with me. I know this because your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Because when we bump into those spaces, we can notice that God is here. We can notice that the shepherd, the guide, is still walking alongside, has not left you, has not left me. And my guess is, in the midst of the most painful moments of these last few months, there has also simultaneously been spaces where you just seen the presence of God. Something has happened, or someone has said something, or you just realize, I couldn't have orchestrated that. That must be God. And those grace notes that show up in our life, that's what David's referring to here in Psalm 23. That I can feel you. I can sense that you're still there. I can acknowledge that you have not abandoned me even when I'm in the darkest valley. And so this is what I mean when I say the good news is that there is a way forward. The bad news is that you and I, we aren't the guide. But the even better news is that we have the ultimate guide. We can follow Jesus through whatever it is that we're facing. And not in an ethereal, I'm aware of it, I'm a religious person sort of way, but in an actually intimate, relational, sort of like I'm traveling footstep after footstep behind where you're going sort of following way. That is what it means to actually be a person that loves and follows Jesus. That's what our mission as a church is about, and that's what we need in this moment. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine a couple weeks ago, and it got to a place where we just were really honest and sharing how exhausted we were, how frustrated we were with the situation. And it was really the first time for me that I had let that come out, in about 5 months of quarantine at the time, because I just jumped into that frenetic energy I was talking about. I had just hustled and muscled and tried to, keep my attitude up and to keep my encouragement up and lead other people through this and, lead a church and keep people employed and paying the rent and keep producing content and all this stuff to help keep people connected. And in that moment, in the conversation with my friend, I allowed myself to just come undone and be sad and be tired and be frustrated. And he said something to me that I haven't forgotten since then. It's just been this clear picture and perspective of how to navigate those things. And he looked at me and he just said, Kurt, you don't have to be the one to solve the problem for everybody. You don't have to be the one to solve the problem for everybody. And I looked at him and I said, oh, I know. And he goes, no, you don't. This is what you do. You're a problem solver. I know that energy is inside of you, but you can't solve this. But what you can do is model what it looks like to go to God with your sadness, to go to God with your frustration, to not lean on your own understanding, not depend on your own ability, but to trust in the Lord. And this is why I think when Jesus invited his first followers in that conversation in John 14 to simply trust that when they saw him, they knew what God was like, that the invitation for you and for me, even today, thousands of miles away and thousands of years later, is to know that when we see Jesus, we can know that that's what God is like, is because Jesus knew that this whole thing called life doesn't just require more information, doesn't just require increased knowledge, that actually following Jesus certainly does not depend on how much you know, but it actually is an invitation simply to follow. That the way forward actually requires imitation, not just information. The way forward out of this pandemic, the way forward out of the rut you find yourself in, the way forward out of the relational turmoil or the financial stress that you're feeling, doesn't just require more information. It's not something new you have to learn, but it is an invitation to imitate the peace and the path of Jesus, to trust that he's right there, to trust that wherever it is that you're going, he is calling you forward, to live life with his principles and his perspective, to do it his way, and not to try to fix it yourself, not to try to do it all on your own like I was. Like my friend so gently challenged and encouraged me to take my eyes off of myself, to admit I'm not the guide, but I'm actually the one to follow. And so perhaps for you, there's a very specific space that you need to trust God in. Maybe you've been following Jesus, but it's never been something that you've allowed him into the conversation with you around your finances. And this economic turmoil has really brought financial strain into your conversation with your family or just for yourself. Maybe that's a place that God is inviting you to trust him, to live your financial life his way and to trust that he's going to walk alongside you. Maybe you need to trust God with your relational world. You try to navigate family and dating or parenting or whatever it might look like for you, and it just hasn't gone well, and you've just chalked it up to, well, this is just tough. But have you really stopped to ask the question of what is the right way forward? Is there a better way? Do I need to trust Jesus with my parenting, trust Jesus with my dating, trust Jesus with my marriage? How can I invite him in? Maybe for some of you, that this moment, hearing this message, I don't know how you found us, how you logged on or clicked a button, but I'm so glad you did, because maybe for you, in the midst of all of this, you've never actually decided to trust Jesus. In so many ways, you've admired him or thought it was a good thing to have some sort of faith. Or maybe you've checked out and dismissed him and looked around at your past church experience and said, obviously, there's nothing to that. And wherever that might be for you, wherever you are on that spectrum, I don't blame you. My guess is if I had the same life experience as you, I would think the same way you are right now. But maybe because you're here and you're hearing my voice, there is something in your soul that's saying God is actually inviting you, not into a religion, but into a trusting relationship with Jesus. That you don't have to do it on your own. You don't have to act your way into a feeling. You don't have to act your way into a certain type of behavior. You can simply acknowledge that Jesus is with you right where you are right now, in your living room, in your car, on your way to work, in that tension that you find yourself in, that Jesus is there. And even when you walk through the darkest valley, you can know his presence is right beside you. And so my challenge for us this week, for all of us, is that wherever you need to trust God, to trust him. Would you actually take a moment and maybe write it on a Post-it and put it on your mirror, or put it on your wall, or put something on your phone as a screenshot that you can acknowledge. Come back to that passage of Proverbs 3:5 where it says, don't trust in your own understanding. Don't lean and depend on what it is that you already know, but to actually trust in the Lord. And that this week, when you find yourself in a situation that gets brought up to your consciousness, that gets brought up in your soul, you're like, oh yeah, I need to remember, I should not depend on what I know or what I don't know. I'm not the guide, but I can trust in the one who is. I can trust in the Lord. So I'd love to pray for you as we wrap up our gathering today. And then we're going to have some questions and some prayers for you as we close out to continue this conversation throughout your week. Will you pray with me? Gracious Heavenly Father, thank you so much that you do not leave us to navigate this on our own, as there is so much that we still have to figure out, and there is so much ahead of us that we don't understand. Thank you that we are not to depend on our own knowledge, on our own ability, or on our own understanding, but we can simply trust and follow you. I pray that we would this week, and it would change how we experience whatever life brings our way. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. We're going to continue in our worship gathering with some more singing in just a moment. But before we sing, we have another way that we love to worship around here, and that is through giving. And when we offer our resources back to God, it is actually an act of worship because it demonstrates what we just talked about, that we actually are placing our trust in him with the things that are most dear to us, our resources. And so if you're here tuning in for just the very first time, we want you to know there's no obligation for you to give. But if you call Restoration Church your home, we would love to invite you to give joyfully and generously. There's 3 ways you can do that. You can go to restorationchurchsd.com/give, and you can click right there and give online. That's the safest and most secure way to do it. It's the way my family and I choose to do it. You can do a one-time gift or set up reoccurring giving so you can consistently and faithfully support the mission of Restoration Church. You can grab your cell phone and text any amount in the message to the number 84321 and give that way. And you can give right from wherever you are, or you can mail a check to our building here in San Diego, and we would receive it that way. We would love for you to participate in moving our mission forward and serving the needs of those in San Diego with the love of Jesus. So thank you so much for your generosity. And if you prayed for the very first time to trust Jesus with your life, we would love to hear about it. If you haven't yet, you can go to restorationchurchsd.com/new, fill out our connection card, or if you're viewing in real time, you can put it in the chat. We would love to connect with you, answer any questions you have, send you a gift, and help you get going on your new spiritual journey. Well, we're going to continue to worship together through one more song. Our creative team's about to lead us, so let's prepare our hearts to worship. Thanks for joining us today at Restoration Church Online.